This is Granny Dot. Nice to have you with me again. We are going to continue the story of Steinbeck's Ghost. We did chapter 1 last time. I hope you remember. And now we're going to do chapter 2. It's about time, Mr. Williams. Nice to see you again. Charlene Babb was Travis's favorite librarian. If she weren't an adult, he would have thought of her as a friend. He'd known her since he was a little kid, from family Saturdays at the library. Over the years, she had put 100 different books in his hands, and no matter what book she suggested, he always loved it. Travis didn't realize how much he'd missed her until he saw her behind the main checkout counter. Hi, Miss Babb. How are you? I'm fine, now that you're back. It's been months, way too long. I was afraid you'd been sucked into some endless video game. It happens, you know. But I knew you'd be back. You couldn't have read every book just yet, Mr. Williams. Travis felt himself blush. Miss Babb always called him Mr. Williams. And while he knew she was just being polite and funny, he couldn't help feeling a little nervous when she called him that. It made him feel like a kid and a grown-up at the same time. Well, he said, leaning against the counter. See, we moved to the east side, and I knew that. I've been standing here for months, waiting for you. Your folks coming? No, ma'am, he said. He always seemed to get extra polite around Miss Babb. They're still at work. I rode my bike over. Very good, she said. Miss Babb hadn't changed at all. But why should she have? It had only been a few months. She was tall and thin, with a mane of wild blonde hair. She held her head high, as if she could see something behind you that no one else could. She was a little older than his parents. He knew that, but he couldn't tell how much older. Adults were confusing that way. You could never get their ages right. Miss Babb was married and had 2 kids, but was always Miss, even to Travis's parents. The library was the same too. It had never been brand new, as far as Travis could tell. The carpets had always been beige and worn. The shelves were still the same old brown metal shelves they'd always been. The cinder block walls the same white on the grown-up side of the library, or yellow on the kids' side. Even the newest books on the new arrival shelves looked worn because of the plastic covers over their bright dust jackets, and the smell was exactly the same, the dusty odor of old books. Travis was relieved to find the library unchanged. On the ride over, he had the weird thought that since he'd last been here, the library might have become brand new, shiny. Well, Miss Babb said, tell me all about it, your new house and everything. The library seemed extra quiet today. To one side of the checkout counter, past the new arrivals, a few adults sat alone at different tables, hunched over books and newspapers. To the other side of the counter, near the big windows that looked out on the street, a young girl, probably a fifth grader, sat alone in the kids section, curled up in a beanbag chair. A bulging excuse me, a bulging backpack of homework sat next to her, but she was reading a novel. Travis told Miss Bab all about Bella Linda Terrace, except the part about it being like Camazotz and how the word had popped into his head that day. If anybody would understand, she would. She had given him the book in the first place, but he felt like he wanted to keep that to himself a bit longer, as if the word were still echoing in his head. "What's it called again?" Miss Bab asked. "Bella Linda Terrace." "Ha!" Miss Bab slapped the front counter. "Is that funny?" Travis didn't get it. "Kind of," Miss Bab said. "It sounds like one of those made-up names. Do you know what it means?" Uh, Bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich?" Travis remembered the first time he saw the initials BLT on the front gate of the subdivision. "Ha!" She slapped the counter again. "Touché, Mr. Williams, touché. But I'm pretty sure it doesn't mean that." "Probably not. And that's a shame." Miss Bab typed into her computer, then scribbled with a pencil on a piece of scratch paper. "Here, if you've got time, you can look it up. This is a dictionary with 5 different languages. That's your clue. Come back later and tell me what it means." Travis looked at the call numbers. They started with REF, the reference section. "Now," Miss Bab said, "what brings you here?" "Just looking, hanging out, you know. Take your time. And now," she said with a flourish, "if you'll excuse me, my public awaits." She bowed to Travis, then took a pile of books from an old man with a white goatee. "Hello, Mr. Ray," she said, winking at the man. She began to scan his books into the computer. "Hydrology again, I see. Well, you gotta dig that." She and the old man both laughed. Travis was pretty sure he understood the joke they shared. It had something to do with water. "Excuse me, I'll be right back. Hi, I'm back. Now on page 25. Travis was looking at books and not looking. He was pretending to look, but mostly he was letting the library wash over him. It felt great to be here, like being home again. It was strange to be so happy to be here. This was, after all, just the library, a very common place to most people. He remembered Ray Bradbury's "Something Wicked This Way Comes," an awesome and terrifying book about a mysterious carnival that arrived one October day in a small Midwestern town. The 2 boys, Jim and Will, hid in the town's library. They were being chased by Mr. Dark and the Illustrated Man. Despite his many powers, Mr. Dark was afraid of the library and anxious to get the boys out of there. Travis pictured the boys where they hid, high in the shelves between the novels of Dickens and Dostoevsky. He wasn't the only one who thought the library was an important place. After grazing the new arrivals, Travis went up the short steps to the main adult collection and browsed the aisles there, enjoying the hush of the place. Then he wandered back to the kids' section. Miss Babb was still busy and roamed, head tilted to the right, past his favorite shelves. Fiction. The books he'd read and loved seemed to jump out at him, as if waiting for him. The Teddy Bear Habit, Henry and Ribsy, The Chocolate War, M.C. Higgins the Great, Bridge to Terabithia, Tuck Everlasting, Homer Price. Oh, something wicked this way comes. Funny to find that one now. On and on. Every book he recognized opened up the world of that book to him. These weren't stacks of paper bound together with glue or string. They weren't items or products. Every book was an entire universe. Corral de Tierra by Ernest Ulster. He hadn't thought of this book when coming to the library, but there it was. Of all his favorite books, this might be his favorite ever. He slipped it from the shelf and held it flat in his hand. In the foreground of the cover illustration, a young boy, about Travis's age, stood with his back to the reader. In the distance was a mysterious valley, painted in somber greens and blacks, where a shadowy figure lurked near the opening to a deep path. Travis thumbed the pages. They were soft and cold and old. He opened the back cover and looked at the checkout card in its paper sleeve. The book had been checked out 20 or so times in the last few years. Travis had probably checked it out half those times, and he knew that the other readers had checked it out because Miss Babb had given it to them. She loved Corral de Tierra, too. The first time he checked it out was in 6th grade. It must have been a Saturday because he remembered being at the library with his parents that day. He asked Miss Babb, as he'd done many times, if she would recommend a book for him. "I've read about everywhere," he said. "London, Paris, Russia, Kentucky, Los Angeles, Mars, places that don't exist. But I've never read any books about Salinas. Do they make any books about Salinas?" "Oh, my, Mr. Williams. Oh, yes." Miss Babb stomped off to the kids' section, and Travis scurried behind her. She found a copy of Corral de Tierra, the only copy the library owned, and handed it to him. "Corral de Tierra is a real place," she said. "Do you know it?" "It's off 68, on the way to Monterey. A beautiful valley back up in the Santa Lucias. Anyway, this is a book about John Steinbeck when he was a boy. You know, Steinbeck the writer. He was born right here, just a few blocks away. It's all about how he used to go up into the corral and create adventures for himself. It's funny. and spooky. You'll love it. Travis plopped right down in a beanbag chair and started reading. It was a black gray day. The memory of the day was as real as the floor he stood on now. Lots of rain, and the ink dark sky went perfectly with the yellow cinder block walls of the library. He scrunched into the beanbag and read, and was almost halfway through the book when his parents dragged him home. What captured him about Corral de Tierra that first day and every reading since wasn't the plot or the characters, really, although the book was, as Miss Babs said, funny and spooky. A great combination for any book. No, it was something bigger than that. Travis's dad often said when he would sit down to read that he was about to get lost in a book. And Travis understood that plainly. When Travis started Corral de Tierra, he wasn't reading about a place. He was there, in the book, in the valley. And when they walked home that rain-soaked Saturday, and Travis saw the Santa Lucias only a few miles away, he knew exactly how Corral de Tierra looked, and more important, what it felt like to walk there. Miss Bab was right, as usual. He did love the book, and he read it 3 times before it was due again. Now Travis tucked it under his arm. It had been almost a year since he'd read it. He was headed to the elves in the fiction shelves for a Lango when he nearly stepped on a copy of A Wrinkle in Time. It was lying open, pages down, right where some kid had left it. He looked around. The kids section was empty. This was the book he'd come for, so no surprise to find it. But to find it like this, as if it had been left for him, he picked it up and turned it over. The book was open to pages 98 and 99. In the middle of the chapter called A Happy Medium, one word leaped out at him: Camazotz. Ever since he'd remembered the word this afternoon and whispered it, the world seemed changed somehow, like when Alice went through the looking glass. The world still looked pretty much the same, but it was also different. No 2 doubts about it, as his mom liked to say. And Travis liked the change. In the months since they moved to Bella Linda Terrace, he felt he'd been living in some vague dream, cut off from sights and sounds, everything muffled. But now, since this afternoon, he felt alive again, a part of the world. When he said the word Camazotz, he'd been able to escape Camazotz. He tucked A Wrinkle in Time under his arm, too. Time had evaporated. Dusk was coming on. The shadows outside were purple, the buildings pink and orange. He had to get going. It was almost 7. In the REF reference section, he found the dictionary Miss Bab had scribbled down for him. It was a big red book as fat as a loaf of bread. A dictionary of 5 languages into English. He leafed through it, looking up the words Bella and Linda and Terrace. Bella was from Italian and meant beautiful. Linda was from Spanish and also meant beautiful. Terrace was from a bunch of different languages, but it all boiled down to one basic meaning: a place. Beautiful, beautiful place. Now Travis knew why Miss Bab laughed when he said Bella Linda Terrace. The name was nonsense. It didn't mean anything. Bella Linda Terrace was a fake. At the front counter, Miss Bab swept his books toward her. Beautiful, beautiful place, he said. Exactly, she said. Isn't that nuts? Hoop-de-doodle, if you ask me. Nice work, Mr. Williams. Miss Bab waved the electronic scanner over the barcodes on the backs of the books. Again, with Corral de Tierra, let me ask you, which Steinbecks have you read? After he'd read Corral de Tierra, Miss Bab had suggested Steinbeck's The Red Pony, which he loved, even though he cried when the pony Gavilan died. He'd read a lot more Steinbeck since then. Uh, uh, Red Pony, Long Valley, Cannery Row, oh, Tortilla Fat, and Sweet Thursday, too. You should read The Pastures of Heaven, then. She pulled a green and white paperback from under the counter. One swift movement. She seemed to have been practicing. It all takes place in the corral. You'll love it. You never told me about this one. Some books are best for waiting. You're ready now. She scanned the green and white paperback into the computer, and then she took out a chunky silver date stamper from below the counter. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. She stamped the return date in green ink on the cards in the backs of the books. Miss Bab, Travis said, if you have a computer, why do you still use a date stamper? I only do this for special readers, Mr. Williams, friends of the library. I like the sound of it. She opened the back cover of The Pastures of Heaven. Ka-chunk. The man who called himself Gitano was asleep under a bottlebush tree. He was curled up against the mural of old Salinas, his back to Travis. In the lowering dusk, he was hard to make out. Nothing but a soft pile of blue and gray cloth. I am Gitano, and I have come back, the man had yelled. A strange thing to say. What did it mean? It was a familiar sentence, something Travis had read in a book. As the last light of day faded, Gitano seemed to sink back into the mural. Travis swung into his backpack, the books thumping against him, and wheeled away from the library down San Luis, headed to Riker Street. When he'd left Bella Linda Terrace this afternoon, he didn't yet know he was going to visit his old house. It wasn't even an idea then, but the library and his old house were so connected. It now seemed the obvious thing to do. He really should be getting home. He certainly didn't want to get busted by his parents. but he hadn't been to the old house since the move. He was willing to take the chance. The streets of the neighborhood were quiet, but he could hear, over on Main, traffic honking and barking. The afternoon wind had died, and the air around him was fresh and clear. The heat fading quickly, he felt like he was breathing again for the first time in a long time. He pulled up on the sidewalk in front of 137 Riker. At first, everything looked the same. All the lights were on, the shallow porch of the bungalow inviting. The bike lurched forward an inch or two, and Travis felt he could go right up the walk into his old house and his old life. The dining room curtains were open, the room bright and clean. A fancy table was set for dinner, 2 candles lit and flickering. The scene was perfect and all quite wrong. When Travis and his parents lived here, they ate at a small table in the kitchen. Back then, the dining room was his dad's music room. Keyboards and guitars and speakers lined the walls. Cords snaked everywhere. It was never neat. The lawn in front of 137 had been completely resodded, and strange flowers grew out of the beds along the bottom of the porch. On the porch, an old-fashioned swinging chair sat waiting. A square flag with a giant pumpkin and the word autumn rustled in the dying breeze. Definitely not his house anymore. Just then, a woman came into the dining room. She wore a white apron and carried a dish she held with oven mitts. Behind her followed a man and a little girl, a first or second grader. The family sat at the table, the mom and dad at each end, the little girl in the middle, facing the street. The girl waved at Travis, and her parents turned to see who was outside. He stood on the pedals of his bike and pushed off, away from his old house, quite uncertain how to feel about what he'd just seen. Travis coasted through the neighborhood, past the dusky blue houses. He zagged over to Central, headed home to Bella Linda Terrace, knowing he was probably late and headed for some kind of trouble. But the Steinbeck house was on the way. 132 Central was where Steinbeck had been born and raised, and where he had written The Red Pony and Tortilla Flat when he returned home to take care of his dying mother. After Travis started reading Steinbeck, his parents took him to the house for lunch. Volunteers from the Valley Guild served lunches there to help pay for the upkeep of the house and to provide scholarships for local students. Travis loved being in the old Victorian, knowing that the famous writer had lived in its rooms, which were done up in the style of the times, but he was a little disappointed that he couldn't go upstairs to Steinbeck's boyhood bedroom. The manager told him that their insurance didn't allow it. The stairs were too steep. He'd always wanted to go back to the house, as if he could breathe in more of Steinbeck's world there, get closer to the books he loved. Tonight, small spotlights showed the front of the house, but it was otherwise dark. Travis sat on his bike across the street. He tried to imagine what it would be like to be in the upstairs bedroom looking out, to be the writer creating his stories. He wondered if he'd ever sit in his own window and write his own stories. A light came on in the two small attic windows above the front door. A shadow appeared, a person, who pulled aside the lace curtains and looked out one of the windows. A man, no younger, a teenager. The boy sat down, his head still visible. He was looking at something that Travis couldn't see. Travis crossed the street to get a better look, but as he approached the house, the line of sight grew too steep, and he couldn't see anything of the window. He crossed back over to the other side. The boy was still there, a silhouette against the warm yellow room. He stood up and walked out of sight, then crossed the back of the room, then out of sight again, then appeared before the window, staring down. The boy Travis saw wore a white shirt with dark suspenders. He sat down again, quite still, his left hand holding his tilted head. It didn't seem quite right. Not normal, for sure. Why would a teenage boy be in the house at night? But he wasn't doing anything. This was no burglar. Travis stared at the figure in the window. The boy was concentrating. Reading, maybe, or writing. The rest of the house was completely dark inside. It didn't make any sense that someone would still be there at night. The long, low whistle of a freight train broke the evening silence. Travis looked east, past Old Town. He could almost feel the train's rumble. When he turned back to the Steinbeck house, the window was dark, and the boy was gone. Sweating bullets and pumping at full speed, Travis blew through the stone-walled entrance to Bella Linda Terrace, beautiful, beautiful place, and tore down the streets. His head was filled with sentences he kept trying out. Where he had been, why he hadn't left a note, the 7 different excuses why he was late, even the truth of it. The excuses and the truth all seemed lame to him. He wasn't sure he'd believe any of them himself. No two doubts about it. He was in trouble. But from the far end of Harbor Mist Way, Travis could see that his house was dark. His parents weren't even home yet. When his parents finally did get home, a little before 10, he was already in bed and reading the first pages of The Pastures of Heaven. Maybe this book held some clue to what he'd seen in the window of the Steinbeck house. The end of chapter 2. Next time we get together, we will be reading chapter 3. See you then.